Okay, it's live according to my thing. Yep, okay.
It is.
Yep, we have 2 more minutes still. I'll start recording now also, if everybody's okay with that.
Yep.
Since we have a minute, I think, Bill, I want to test something and maybe you can help me. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that executive session slide that I've created? Okay.
Yes.
And if
Yes.
I go and stop my video, can you still see that or no? The slide, the executive session slide, you can?
Yes.
Okay. Wasn't sure if I was able to do it that way.
I have 6 o'clock, but I can't see everybody. Do we have 5? Is John back in view? John, are you with us?
4, 5, 6, 7. I see 7. Quick count. Yep.
Board members? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I'll start things off then. I'll ask, welcome everybody. I'll ask for motion to enter executive session for the purpose of discussing 3 collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law. Thank you. Megan and Julianne. Questions or comments? All in favor? Great. We'll see you on the other link. Deb, I have 6:30. Okay to start?
Yes.
Great. Amy's just coming on board. So I will call the meeting to order and ask everyone to stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everybody in front of me and watching from afar. Thank you for being with us tonight. Nice to have everybody here. Jamie, do you have any opening comments for us?
For the first time in 2 years, I'm going to say no.
That's so exciting.
All right.
I'll just say the musical was really amazing this past weekend and the weekend before. Kudos to everybody for an incredible job and for celebrating Scott Shaman on his retirement. And what a great chance to be all together and be with our fabulous students. So thank you to everybody involved in that. Let's see. Nate is not here. Did we think he was coming tonight? Or is
I
he?
didn't hear that he was not, so maybe I'll just keep an eye on him, and if he shows up, we can
Yeah.
circle back. That's part of the reason I didn't say anything about the musical, because I thought perhaps he would, but
Yeah, I did too. And then I realized it wasn't here. So I figured I'd jump in and steal his thunder. Somebody has to, right?
that's right.
Okay. So if he joins us, we'll let him jump in whenever he's ready. We have minutes up for approval. I'll ask for motions, please. Michelle and Megan, questions or comments? All in favor? That carries unanimously, Deb. Thank you. And warrants, Amy and or Jen, will you make motions, please? Jenna first, Amy
Yes.
second. Great. Questions or comments? All in favor? That carries unanimously too. Thank you. And on to you now, Matt.
Wow, we got to be quick tonight.
I know.
Good evening, everybody. Jamie, do I have rights to share my screen?
You do.
You, all right. So let me pull up the presentation here.
I can't hear you, Matt. Can anybody hear Matt? We
No.
can't hear you. Try again, Matt. Say something.
You can't hear me?
Now we can. Yep.
Oh, perfect. Just
Okay.
need to mute and unmute again.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, at our last meeting, we went through all the building department budgets. We sort of gave a overall picture of where the budget stood at that point, knowing that, as we get closer to budget adoption, which hopefully will be at the next meeting, we refine some of these details. So this meeting will go a little bit more in depth into what's driving the budget, the staffing changes, the different, the budget status, looking at the reserves a little bit more in depth, and then the next steps. So what are the positives of our budget this year? One of them is that our special education BOCES costs are decreasing. Typically, we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting, we are seeing an increase in this area. We have less students that we're anticipating attending out of district placements, which is a positive thing, and also creates some significant savings. So currently about $270,000 savings in that budget line alone. The other good area of increase is the foundation aid. It's a 3% increase. So the way this foundation aid is increasing this year is either you get, if you're underfunded, which we are, you either get half of what you're underfunded or 3%, whichever is greater. We're in the 3% category. And so our increase on from our current state aid is about $580,000. So those are a couple of the positives in helping build this budget. Some of the challenges, the retirement systems, can definitely be a challenge. The teachers' retirement systems only increasing 0.5%, but when you're looking at significant salaries, that number, can increase greatly. So that's a little over $100,000 increase. The biggest challenge, we've discussed this, a few times, the nearly 22% increase in health insurance. So what I can tell you is that increase in health insurance alone, that one line item, is larger than our tax cap increase for this year. If we were, if we go out of the tax cap, but whatever that calculation is, the health insurance is going to be higher. We also, are facing inflation. We're seeing our fuel, electric, natural gas prices skyrocketing right now. Hopefully they'll settle back down. But these are jumping, and everything is a higher cost for us, from paper, all of our material supplies. We're just seeing large increases in those costs. And then there's a few aids where we're seeing a decrease that sort of offset that foundation aid increase. One of them is incarcerated youth. We're responsible for covering the cost of the incarcerated youth program for Ontario County through the schools. Typically, what happens is students get placed from all over the region there, and then the other schools would, through state aid, would pay us. Unfortunately, well, positively, there's not many students there. The unfortunate side of that is on the revenue side, because there are not students there at a very high pace due to COVID and raise the age, we don't get the revenue back. So it becomes a burden on the district. Chapter 8 is a decrease of about $200,000. This is also related to special programs. So when we have a student that is not one of our students traditionally, but is placed here from an out of district location, they become what's called a chapter student, and we get full tuition reimbursement for them. So we're not spending the money now, so we're not getting the aid. And the last year is BOCES aid. We have a decrease of about $150,000. That is simply because in the IT department, you remember we moved all of our expenses from direct purchases through BOCES to increase the aid last year. We're not going to need to spend that entire amount this year because we've now, Dan Bowman has worked to get E-rate funding. So we're covering the purchase of those computers through there. So since we're not purchasing them through BOCES this year, we won't get the aid back next year. It'll be the same expense for us this year, but we're getting revenue in a different stream. Tax cap threshold is 3.19%, or about $1,542,000. We always, this time of year, like looking at our tax levy history. So since the tax cap was instituted in 2012-13, we like showing here that the district has never exceeded the cap and nearly every year has been below the cap. So you'll notice last year our cap was 2.07% and we were at 1.7. This year that number has gone back up to 3.19. The reason we had these lower numbers in the low twos was because the tax cap, one of the major factors in that is growth is determined by inflation, CPI, the growth of inflation, or 2%, whichever is lower. So CPI has been lower than 2% the last several years, which has decreased that number. It's been below 2%. Now CPI is higher than 2%. So we see a number at 2% within that formula. So that causes the increase, and why you're seeing, instead of a 2.19 or 2.07, a 3.19 this year. Staffing changes, and we're still reviewing these. There may be a couple changes, as we go forward before we adopt the final budget. But currently within the budget, we have these additions. We have a 0.5 English language learner teacher in the high school due to higher needs of staffing in that position. 2 elementary teachers in the primary elementary school, and that's just based on enrollment per grade and class sizes per contract. 1 bus driver trainee. Obviously we've heard and lived through the difficulty of filling bus driver positions, always being short, difficult positions to fill nationwide. We also have increased training requirements now. We also reviewed staffing from other school districts of our size. We realized we're understaffed at that position. So bus driver trainee is definitely a needed position. And then we've also looked at enrollment and duties, and we were able to reduce a 0.85 teacher of the deaf. And that's due to attrition. One of the areas that we typically don't cover in this presentation, but for clarity's sake, This is really important for us that we all are on the same page and understand this. The asset preservation project, the $61.7 million project, is started this past summer, right? Has been working throughout this year. We'll go through this summer, all of next year, and the following summer. So we're, not quite halfway through the project. However, we're spending the money at this point. And so on the other end, we need revenue, and we're continuing spending. So part of the process, which we, this is the plan all along, is that as this project goes on, it'll also come into the budget. And so this is the first year where this $61.7 million project starts entering the budget as our expenses increase for borrowing, and our state aid offsets that increase through building aid. So we have, a larger than typical budget increase this year. And I just wanted to show that a good portion of that increase is just from this project. So from the 21-22 budget, our building aid for capital expenses is $3,211,000. Our projected building aid for next year, including the first portion of the $61.7 million asset preservation project, is $4,371,000. So you'll notice the increase in revenue for that project is $1,160,000. On the budget side, on the appropriation side, you'll see that the debt service is increasing from $4.487 million to $5,652,000. So also an increase of $1,165,000. So those two numbers basically offset each other. And so what you see is the difference that the local taxpayer has to pay within this budget is nominal, and that's including transportation aid, transportation expenses, those types of things. So a large portion of our increase in the budget is due to this, the $1,165,000 increase. It's equally offset by building aid. So it's very important that we understand that. You may hear, you may see something that says, the budget is increasing by, why is the budget increasing by so much? This is one of those reasons. And this is the plan since day one, knowing that the building aid would also offset that increase. So getting into the more detailed part of the revenue side. So when we take property taxes, pilots, and penalties and combine those, we're projecting currently in the budget just over $1.5 million increase. State aid, we went through those different state aid factors, the 3% increase in foundation aid, the decrease in incarcerated youth aid, chapter aid, and BOCES aid. So overall, we're looking at about a $360,000 increase in state aid. I broke out the building aid simply to show that change that I showed on the previous slide. So that increase is $1,160,000. We're not projecting any increase or decrease in Medicaid. And then we have some small miscellaneous revenues that we have a slight decrease projected. So overall, the budget at this point on the revenue side is $81,442,000, just about over $3,022,000 increase from year to year. On the expense side, if I go back here, $3,022,000 increase on revenues. The expense side, you're going to see that expense is the appropriations are higher than that revenue increase. So the administrative part of the budget, we're showing an increase of just under $200,000. The program, which includes everything that you're going to see within a classroom, includes transportation, supplies, anybody working within those buildings, excluding the principals and the administration of those buildings, is $2,055,000 increase. And then on the capital side, which is all of our maintenance and then all of our debt service. So that's where you're seeing that large increase, is that capital project, that debt, that borrowing increasing by $1,665,000, along with increases in expenses in the custodial maintenance departments. So overall, an increase of $3,918,000 and a budget of $83,248,000. Down the bottom, you're going to notice the percentage of the budget. This is a little bit different this year in that we're showing a decrease in administration and a large decrease in program. even though both those areas are increasing expense. And the whole reason behind that, again, goes back to that the rise in debt service, and that capital increase is causing the other areas to decrease percentage-wise. So our current budget status at an $83,248,803 budget. We're looking at a tax levy. This is at the 3.19% levy of $49,900,441. All other revenues are $31,542,243. And with that, we have a gap between the revenues and our current appropriations of just over $1.8 million that we would need to appropriate reserves and fund balance. Currently in this year, we're in that $900,000 range. This is nearly double, but last year we decreased that greatly. And we had the opportunity to do that, knowing that we would end up at some point getting back up to these levels of appropriated reserves and fund balance. In the last several years, we've been at the $1.5 million. We've been at $1.8 million. We've been slightly over $2 million. So this is an area that we've been in previous years and are able to handle on the size of the budget. An example of what reserves we would appropriate. So $1 million for the employees' retirement system, $330,000 for our workers' compensation premium. Our unemployment insurance, we expect to go back to normal levels from, compared to where we were during COVID. So we budgeted that at $20,000. Employee benefit accrued liability, that is for post-employment benefits that are buyouts associated with days, so a sick day, vacation day, personal day. So we are anticipating appropriating $100,000 from that reserve. Tax certiorari reserve, any settlements against any tax certiorari claims against us, we budgeted $100,000, and then fund balance of just over $250,000 in this version of the budget. So each time during this, this presentation, we go through some different, tax scenarios, and we typically start with that, the 2%, a 3% if that's below the cap, and then what the cap is. And so these are just examples. If we were to go out the cap, that would generate $49,900,441 on the tax levy. We would appropriate just over $1.8 million, and the tax rate would be 1875. What I want to remind everybody on the board is that 1875 is simply the current tax rate of 1817, increasing by 3.19%. So it doesn't account for any growth in our community for property values. Just based on my initial numbers, just from the city of Canandaigua that I looked at today, just putting the city of Canandaigua's growth in there on their their very early version would bring that number down below 1850 based on the 3.19% increase. That does not include the town of Canandaigua, which is our largest municipality, does not include town of Farmington, those types of things, and whatever growth they may have. But 1875 is very conservative. That's the tradition we've used, just taking the current rate, increasing it by the tax percentage increase, and using that, knowing that it's higher than what will be adopted, what it'll actually be in August when we calculate it. 3% calculation, if the board decided that 3% was the appropriate area, it would be a reduction of just under $100,000 in revenue on the tax levy, and a decrease of about 4 cents from the 3.19% range. And then if the board wanted to go anywhere down near the 2% range, which I would definitely not recommend it, with the different factors that are heading in this year, the appropriated reserves and fund balance would be very high, around nearly $2.4 million. And we would have to revisit what's currently in the budget as to what we're going to, be able to cover, because that's definitely at a higher level than I think we'd be comfortable with. So those are the different scenarios, and obviously anything in between. If we were to choose to go out above 3.19%, just want to remind the board that that would require a 60% supermajority vote. Anything 3.19% and lower, it just is a typical majority vote. You need 50% plus one to pass the vote. So our next steps, tonight, typically we give the board an opportunity to discuss the tax levy and reserve scenarios. We're hoping to adopt the budget at our next meeting on April 4th. Must be completed by April 25th. Budget hearings May 9th, and the budget vote is May 17th. So I will stop sharing my screen, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Matt. I'll open it up to the board now. Questions, comments, concerns? John.
I'll get us started. Matt, the 3.19, who comes up with that calculation? Do we internally? Does the state tell us that's what it is?
Yeah, so we internally have to calculate that. There's parts within that the state calculates, that there's fixed numbers. So, the 2% number, that's a fixed number. In prior years, it was a different number that's fixed. There's a growth factor number that's fixed in there. But the rest of the formula we have to calculate ourselves and determine it. We have to determine the calculations for the numbers that fit into that formula.
Which would then be subject to, audit or litigation. Should someone say, this board went out at 3.19, the proper calculations would have been 3.15, for example.
Yep.
Now, if through that audit or review or litigation, they come to find out 3.15 was the correct number, which would have meant we would have needed a supermajority. How does that, has that ever happened, or do you know what would trigger or what would happen in that situation?
Yeah, so what happens is if that's ever audited and it's determined that the district went higher than what is deemed should have been calculated, then what happens is there's a amount that is placed into a separate reserve. It's called a tax offset reserve, and that is used on the following tax levy to decrease your cap. So let's say, in your example, 3.15%, it was determined as was the accurate number. That 0.04 would be set aside and reduce next year's tax cap by that amount of money.
Okay. And then I've always been my position. You are the expert at this, not me. This is not my field of expertise. I rely on you, Jamie, and the rest of the team that give us the proper direction. So for me to say what is right or wrong, I rely on you guys as our professionals. I just feel if we're going to do 319, I would never go to the very top, because you're just asking for someone to come back and audit you or question you or litigate over what could be a minute, small little margin of error. But again, I would tend to lean towards whatever you, and everyone else, Brian and Matt and Jamie, think is the best for our district.
I appreciate John, and that is a fair point, a fair argument.
Thank you, John. Jen.
I want to talk a little bit about the inflation factor that's in there. You mentioned that is a big part of that calculation. So I'm just curious, where does the district or the state get that inflation number from? How is that derived? And I'll tell you why I'm asking. What I'm wondering about is, in certain points in time, like now, we have very high inflation, and then it'll calm down a bit, and then we'll go back to high inflation. Is it some date that the state picks that this is our date to determine what the inflation number is, that may or may not actually represent our costs? Or how do we get there on that big number?
Yeah, so it's the CPI is, they take that from the federal government. It's a 1-year look back, so it's a 12-month growth. Each municipality, so towns, villages, cities, all have, we all have different budget adoption dates, so we all have a different look back period, but it's a 12-month period for everybody. And so it's either that CPI number, if it's below 2%, that's the number that we're locked in at. If it's 2% above, we're locked in at 2%. So we're hurt when the inflation's low because that number is low, and we're really hurt when the inflation or the CPI is high because we're locked in at a 2% number.
Very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Was just curious how different districts ended up differently in some of that, and you just explained it very well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jen. Other questions? Milton.
Hi, Matt. This is a sort of a left field question here, so I apologize if you're not prepared to answer it. That's okay. We can talk about it. So you showed a graph this time where the tax levy amount at 3.19%, and then you had the state aid, and then you had the appropriated fund balance. I'm just curious, of our total budget, the tax levy, is the percentage going up each year, or is the percentage fairly stable, or is it going down? And that, again, maybe completely left field there, maybe a different way of thinking about the percentages that make up our budget, tax levy versus.
I don't typically look at it that way. I do look at overall, what percentage of the budget is the levy, what is state aid, how it's been, over a multi-year period, what percentage, how it's changed. I can't speak to that off the top of my head, but yeah, it would be easy one for me to look up for you and get back to you on them.
My gut impression is, given the increase in state aid we've seen this year, that it should actually be less than what we've in previous years, but that's just my gut instinct.
Other questions? So Matt, I think it would be helpful. And maybe I missed it when you did the presentation. I heard what you definitely don't recommend. Do you want to share with us what you definitely do recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend at this point that we're, at or near the tax cap. That's not something that, in the 5 or 6 years that, I've been here that we've, really needed to do. I think we've only been there once, and that was as we adopted a budget in June heading into what we didn't know, the 2.19% 2 years ago, as we're, just at the beginning of COVID, and we're listening to potential state aid cuts of 20%. The health insurance increase of 22% is just something that there's nothing we can do about it. That's the new base, right? And so next year, that health insurance number is starting at the new calculated number. It's not going to be lower, it's going to increase, and we know that. And trend is 10 to 12%. So we have to expect that going forward. So if this is a year where we just have to, sort of look at that and say the 3.19% increase is not enough to even cover that health insurance increase. And so while there's, while it might be a little bit more difficult than other years, that's definitely someplace that I would recommend.
Okay. So I do want to just go around and sort of take the temperature, since we'll have to be approving this next week or at our next meeting. And so I think, John, you started out, and I think we have a sense of where you are, but if I could start with you again, and then I'll make my way around with what you would be comfortable approving.
I defer to our professionals, but I always like to have that little margin of error in there. So if you're saying 319, I would be more comfortable at, say, 31 or 312, somewhere, just giving us that slim margin should we be challenged as to how close our calculations are to what they truly were.
Okay. Thank you, Megan.
I kind of agree with John, and I'm really mad that I have to say that because it's John. But I do rely on whatever your expertise is on that. But I also agree that having a little bit of a leeway just in case. But it's hard because, like you said, with the health insurance, especially, and coming out of COVID and all that stuff, to make up some of that percentage from before, I guess. But yeah, I kind of agree with what John was saying, was going down just a little bit, but staying close to the top. would be my opinion as well. So
Thank you, Milton.
So, yeah, I'm leaning towards the 3.19.
Thank you, Julianne.
I'm also leaning towards the 3.19, given all of the factors that we're facing right now. I think that what Matt is recommending makes the most sense to me.
Thank you, Michelle.
This will come as no surprise that I'm comfortable going up to the cap.
Thank you, Michelle. Jen?
To have to say this out loud, Megan, also pains me. I also am leaning a bit in John's direction. I think that there is a net gain by being a bit under the cap. I am sensitive to, what taxpayers are going through with their own costs. There is, I think, Matt, if I saw this right, maybe we're only saving $500,000+ between, a 3.15 and a 3.19. But to me, trying to be that careful with the budget seems to make sense to me from a taxpayer point of view. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I'll say I tend to lean where John is on this one.
And I am comfortable going up to the cap, and Beth having the experience of having heard the budget presentation at agenda setting is also comfortable. So does that give you enough for tonight, Matt? Is there anything more that you need from us?
No, I don't need anything more. Oh,
Jamie?
Did we skip Amy?
Amy, I'm so sorry.
Oh, goodness, don't
I
be
missed
sorry.
you at the bottom of my screen. Go ahead.
No, I'm comfortable with the cap. I mean, obviously, the cost of healthcare alone at 20% increase, and the incremental difference to the taxpayer is not a lot to be able to cover that. So I'm good with the cap.
Okay, thank you, and I apologize again.
No worries.
And of course, board members are still encouraged and able to ask questions. Change your mind, ask different questions. You can email Matt, email Jamie, anything that will help you to be able to make your vote at our next meeting is welcome. Okay. Jamie, anything else from you on the budget presentation?
Thanks to Matt and everybody who spends so much time putting it together and making sure it's accurate and responsible as possible, given our restrictions. So
Yeah.
really thankful he's on our team.
Yep. Likewise. Thank you, Matt. Okay, Nate, thank you for joining us. Sorry about the little bit of a mix up there. Would you like to go ahead and make your comments now, please?
Yeah, sure, no worries. This past week we had the musical close up, and that was amazing. It was super funny and fun to watch. It was a pretty good turnout. I think my mom said they had something like 2,700 tickets sold, so it's good for the theater program. And then this past week, I think it was last week actually, spring sports started. So a lot of people have been excited about that. Not really a whole ton else. I mean, I think this warmer weather has some of us feeling some senioritis, but
It's okay
yeah,
to feel it. It's okay to feel it, just not to really act on it, right?
exactly. But yeah, I mean, that's about it. So
Great, thank you. And if you need to go ahead. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Have a good night.
Let's see, we have a consensus agenda up for a vote. Motions, please. Julianne and Milton, questions or comments? All in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you.
You included the supplemental.
Oh,
correct?
supplement, yes, supplemental. Thank you, John. And let's see, policy, Jamie's going to report out since Beth is not here.
Yeah, thanks. We just looked at a couple things. One was the audit committee charter. We took a look at that. Not that it's a policy, but I think audit committee wanted policy to just put their eyes on it and give some recommendations and edits. We tried to simplify it as best as possible and remove some repetitiveness that sometimes you'll find in legalese. So we spent some time doing that, and I'm trying to find my document. Oh, here it is. We also talked about there's a bill being posed around pilots where it would exempt schools or the taxpaying entity from a pilot out of school taxes. And we weren't sure if we wanted to make any kind of formal stance on that or do a resolution around the support of that bill. I believe we're certainly supportive of the bill. But we want to get a sense of, does it have any traction or legs before we put time and energy into a resolution and advocacy. We've done some local advocacy, but bills need to be co-sponsored in both houses before they really can go very far. And from our understanding right now, it's not there yet, but it's something we're going to keep on our radar and come forth with a resolution potentially if it does seem to have some actual attention that it could happen.
Great.
And that was it.
Perfect. Thank you. Character, Amy or Milton? Milton?
So we had another meeting. This was back in March 10th. So this was last week, 2 weeks ago. And we were able to discuss a couple items from the building share outs. We heard some updates around what happened in the month of February. No surprise, the Super Bowl was one of the items discussed. We also heard a little bit about the sunshine work done by Kelly Scammell. And we spent the majority of our meeting planning for hopefully an in-person meeting on May 12th. There was some discussion about ways in which we might involve our community partners, getting them there, and then discussing how we can work together to try to promote those character education goals.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
CIE, Jen or Milton? Jen?
So it was a very interesting meeting. Very quickly, we had a great presentation on art program review where there was quite a bit of discussion on changing some things within art education to reflect, let me make sure I get this right. It was fascinating. Teaching for artistic behavior. Obviously something that I need more practice with. This is not an area of my comfort at all, but it was fantastic description. We also did some work around summer curriculum writing proposals and did some more work on the counseling plan and expanding that to be really more of a comprehensive mental health plan. The counseling staff talked about some of the mapping that they've done for time on task. So how much time do they spend doing different things over the course of their work day, work week, work month. Fascinating stuff. I really support the idea of going to this comprehensive mental health plan. It makes a lot of sense, particularly coming out of pandemic. And I applaud the group for all the work they're putting in on it. Then finally, we did a PD update and Chris and gang is just hitting that one out of the park. So they really need to be applauded for that as well. So I'm going to stop for a second and ask Matt, what did I miss?
I think you covered it perfectly. Thank you. Didn't miss a thing.
Great. Thank you, Jen. And Jen, is COVID-19 committee adjourned? Or
we had our very last meeting, talked about the pile of tests that we still have at the school, and we may actually get more. And what options are there, because it doesn't make any sense to get the tests at the school and then turn around and put them in the trash or whatever. So, we want to be mindful of everybody's resources, even if it didn't come out of the school budget. So, some talking about that and talking about some of the other variants and where things may go in the future. Some of the stuff that we thought came through our group and how things went really well and how the group has a lot to be proud of what has been accomplished in the last couple of years. And then we put ourselves on hiatus. So the committee is now officially done. So that's it.
wow, that's pretty exciting. Thank you. Thank you to everybody for making us as safe as we were and for just incredible work. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's see. I think that's all we have. Anything else from you, Jamie?
Yeah, I would just say, to be clear, I did request a stop on any more tests coming our way. We have I think Debbie did an inventory. We have 10,000 kits, which is 20,000 tests, and they expire in a few months. And whether or not the expiration is extended by the FDA and they can still be used and counted or not, we don't know. We've done a number of distributions to families, and there's just no demand for them. And so I scratched my head a little bit when the governor announced 20 million more heading out. It just doesn't seem like the time. If the numbers surge again, then maybe, but the demand's not there. It just seems awfully wasteful. So I don't even know what to do with them all at this point, other than maybe put out to the community, if there's anybody who wants them, please just come by. We'll load them up. So if anybody hears of anyone at all in our community in need of tests, we're not even restricting it just to students and staff at this point. We'll make them available to anybody in our community.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else for the greater good, I'll ask for motions to adjourn. Michelle and Jen, all in favor? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, everybody.